podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to Away the Podcast, the official podcast from the team at Roker Report. It's Martin here, and today we are bringing you yet another episode of On This Week, where we take a journey back in time and relive some of the key events that took place in this week in the history of Sunderland AFC. And helping me to do that today is, of course, the regular On This Week lineup. First of all, Chris Wynn. How are you, mate?
All right, mate. Are we the official Roker Report podcast now? I want to know where all these unofficial ones are.
Hey, you had some unofficial Twitter accounts, didn't you, back in the day? So, there's probably...
That's very
probably
true.
room
Good
for
point.
an unofficial Roker Report podcast.
Good point. It's only a matter of time, really.
Not that we want to give anybody ideas.
Well, that's it. We've sealed the deal now. They'll be on it.
Another regular On This Week and, of course, an On This Day contributor on the website, Andrew Smithson.
Hello, Martin. How are you doing?
I'm exceptionally well, mate. After the week that we've just had, we've been recording these early on in the week, but we thought we'd leave this one till after the playoff semi-final, because a couple of the things that we are talking about kind of have a bit of a relationship to events of this last week, aren't they? So we can weave those in as we see fit. And to help us do that as well is Kelvin Beattie. Hello, mate.
Morning, lads. How you doing?
Excellent. And, getting towards the end of May, the regular season's usually winding down, and while there's not a mountain of exciting games to talk about, the ones that are pretty influential and key and pivotal are pretty significant and mammoth, really. And at the end of last week's episode, Andrew gave us a few clues to the identity of somebody who features in the very first game and incident that we're going to talk about today, Andrew.
Yeah, that's right. For those that can't remember, we gave a few clues. This particular person was born in February 1953 and was our first £200,000 signing. He played during the 1976-77 season, which we're going to talk about today. He scored in a win against Coventry, which is a club we're going to talk about today. And I don't know, lads, did anybody pick up on who that was? Any suggestions before I give the answer out? Kelvin's smiling. He might have half an idea.
I want to give you all the glory.
Bubbly.
Even better. We didn't just get the answer, we got the chant as well. Perfect. Yes, it was Bob Lee, who was part of the team that, part of what we're calling the Coventry Affair, aren't we? I think that's what we've titled it for now.
The Coventry Affair. And I think we've got to make that just a regular thing now. Kelvin has to sing the answer to the previous week's question. Fine voice there, Kelvin. When we were piecing together this episode, I was thinking, do we really want to be talking about Coventry? Because I was doing this on Sunday and Monday, obviously before the playoff semi. I was like, oh shit, do we really want to be talking? People are going to be completely fed up with Coventry. It was going to be making things a lot worse. But I'm absolutely fine to talk about Coventry as much as we want today. We've had this really strange rivalry with them, and it's obviously it's come to a head over the last couple of weeks, where we were in the lead up to the first leg and in the lead up to the second leg, and Gavin and I were talking about it a little bit on the podcast that we did after the game, and it all stems back to this one game or one incident, doesn't it, in 1977. I think it's been exasperated by a few things that have happened subsequently, but you can you trace everything back to last game of the season. I think we're away at Everton, need a point. Coventry playing Bristol City, and there's a bit of a traffic jam, Kelvin.
Yeah. I mean, there is a lot of myth around, I think, what actually happened at that game, but there's certainly some truths as well emerge when you dig into the press cuttings and stuff like that about what was going on at Highfield Road. There was certainly, there was over 10,000 Bristol City fans made the journey to Coventry, and there was a problem with traffic. There was a road traffic accident. Jimmy Hill, in his autobiography, he always says it was a combination of the police and the ref that said the game had to be held up for a quarter of an hour to let all these Bristol City fans into the ground. definitely, I mean, their attendance that night was huge in comparison to other games that played that season. I'd actually been there earlier in the season. I saw our first victory of the season at Coventry, and a Bob Lee goal. And by gum, there was hardly 20,000 in the ground, and they were a very, very quiet bunch that day. So it all kind of, it was a hell of a journey that season. And for it to finish on a Thursday night with Bristol and Coventry playing each other, both potentially could have gotten relegated that night. Any win, any positive result in that game, and we're safe. And the losers go down. There was another team involved, West Ham as well, but we'll maybe come back to them. So it was. The truth was, a lot of fans, 10,000 Bristol fans, road traffic accident, a delay. Jimmy Hill, did he orchestrate the delay? No, he didn't. But I think he probably, reading in between the lines, took advantage of it. I'm guessing that he will not have been disappointed about that delay as ordered. Their game kicks off. It's a hell for leather game. The match reports tell you that Coventry went 2-0 up. Tommy Hutchison scored both goals. There were players being booed. The ref was struggling to manage it. They were really going at each other. And Bristol City came back just after Tommy Hutchison scored his second goal. Bristol City scored straight away, and then they scored in the 80th minute to bring the game level. And this is the point at which things start going awry. Was the game delayed quarter of an hour? Was it 5-7 minutes? Depending what you're reading, you get all sorts of figures in terms of how long the game was delayed. But in the closing section of the game, it's 2s each. Both teams are safe because in the last minute of our game, Bruce Rioch scores for Everton, and we're 2-0 down and no way back with the result. That result was then what definitely happened was Jimmy Hill got that result. Their game's still going on. It's 2s each. And he was described by the Daily Mirror as racing into the announcer's box and screaming at him to get the result put up on the new scoreboard and announced over the tannoy. And there's not just the Daily Mirror, there's a couple of other papers that reference his sprint along to the announcer's box. That's done. It flashes up on their new scoreboards. It's announced over the tannoy, and that game at Highfield Road turns into a totally different game. Bristol City have the ball. Apparently they keep the ball in their half of the field and pass it about between goalkeeper and defenders. Coventry make little or no attempt to get the ball. They stay in their half of the field virtually. I think there was one story about Mick Ferguson, the Coventry forward, trotted over the halfway line and he was shouted at to get back over his side of the field, and they see the game out.
I was watching a YouTube video earlier with highlights of the game on, and there's an interview with a fella who used to play for Bristol City, who's obviously done a couple of years later, and he was saying exactly that. He was saying, we were just passing the ball about, we stayed in our own halves. Mick Ferguson came into our half, and we shouted at him, "Oi, you're not supposed to be here. You get back in your own half." So even from the horse's mouth, or one of the horses, that all certainly is very true.
You can add to the conspiracy theory as well things like Alan Dix, the Bristol City manager, was Jimmy Hill's right-hand man at Coventry in the 60s. So they knew each other really well. That was a fact. At the end of the game, what fueled a bit more of the conspiracy theory was the likes of Gordon Milne and Alan Dix seen drinking champagne together, almost arm in arm. The players hugging and kissing each other at the end of the game. It just fueled the fury. A few hundred miles up the road, were absolutely horrible to see them reports and photographs.
Even on the YouTube clips, there's footage of the Coventry and Bristol City players going in dressing rooms with their arms around each other and hugging each other because collectively they've survived. But I guess from a if you take it away from Sunderland being involved, you can look at the delayed kick-off time, which wouldn't happen now. The two matches, they would delay half time or something, wouldn't they, in the other game to let the games catch up. But I think human nature is, if both of you know that you just have to see this out and neither team score and you're both going to be okay, it's going to be very hard to convince anybody else to do otherwise, isn't it? But Chris, I was listening to your podcast that you did with David Snowden about his new book around this sort of period, and he said, the story kind of almost started before this game with Coventry and Bristol City having games. I think it was against Liverpool and Man U.
Well, that's what he was saying. He was saying that when Sunderland went to Everton, he basically said this shouldn't have mattered. He said it should have been a game that was kind of put to bed, because if the fixtures had been any different and Bristol City had a fixture against Liverpool at some point in the season when they were fighting for the title, he said it would have been all over. He said we would have survived and everything like that. And he said it was one of them. And I don't know if you remember that, Kelvin, but he said it was one of them where he was just thinking, well, that's 2 points for Liverpool. And actually, just on that 2 points thing, this was the final season for 2 points for a win. Actually, I think it went to 3 points for a win the season after. But he said, if that happened at any point in the season, and he said he was looking out for the result and he didn't know the result and he found it out on the news late at night. And he just said, because he was so kind of relaxed about, Liverpool will do a job there, they'll beat them, loads better side. And then when he heard that they'd basically down tools almost and Bristol City got the result, he was more shocked at that than what happened on the final day of the season.
Yeah.
Can you remember finding out the score, Kelvin, at that one?
The Bristol Liverpool.
Yeah.
Which game? That the Liverpool game.
Yeah.
No, yeah. I don't remember specifically finding out about that. I know that on the I'd gone to the game on the Thursday at Everton, and I have to admit I was in a right battle with myself for about 4 or 5 days afterwards. And I could hardly look at anything football related because it had been a hell of a journey that season, irrespective of Coventry and Bristol.
Yeah, I was just about to say, Kelvin, I mean, in a year where we'd lost Bob Stoke or Jimmy Montgomery, like legends of the Sunderland full stop, kind of left the club. And the fact that we went on ridiculous runs without going for a win, Bob Stoke didn't get a top flight victory at the start of that season before he left. And then there was the whole, Brian Clough, Willie, won't he? Apparently he came at the interview a bit worse for wear by the sounds of it, from what David Snowden said. Jimmy Adamson got the job. And then there was controversial changes with the whole Burnley clang, and then, bringing in a commercial director from Burnley who was trying to sell golf gear apparently in the club shop and things like that. So, I mean, to go through all of that and then get to the final of this day of the season that shouldn't matter, and for all that to unravel. I mean, again, I think we're going to say it on every episode of these that we do, that it's typical Sunderland, isn't it?
Well, we were rooted to the bottom of the division from December the 18th to February the 22nd. It was dreadful. It was absolutely dreadful to be rolling in and knowing what was going to happen, travelling home and away. It was absolutely brutal for the supporters, never mind the players. And we didn't score a goal for 12 games. Adamson and Merrington, when they came in, two northeastern lads, by the way, both of them. Adamson from Ashington, Merrington from Newcastle. When they took over, they lost the first 7 games that they played. So it was terrible. Having been so excited about the promotion, Bob Stokoe gets up. You're really looking forward to the season. I think the sale of Pop Robson to West Ham was an error early in the season. I didn't think that was a very clever move. Monty Siddall taking over from Monty. Do you know what? Barry Siddall, he never let us down that season. I loved the bones of Monty, but Siddall never let us down that season. And then I'll tell you a key thing I always think about this, looking back. I didn't realise at the time the signing of Mick Doherty at the end of December, I think he came on board. And we'll remember the young players coming into the team and the team turning. But I tell you, Mick Doherty was one of the ingredients that turned that almost turned that season into a magical one. But we're desperate coming into February, and then we beat Bristol City at home. Mel Holden scored a goal. I remember walking out that night. That was a terrible game. But I remember walking out thinking, my God, if this is what it takes to the end of the season, let's just do it. I'm not bothered about being entertained. Let's just have the results, and off we went. The youngsters, Arnott, Elliott, Gary Rowell had already made his debut. He was already in there. That was a fantastic story. You throw Alan Brown in there as well. Super sub, we used to call him. Him sitting on the bench, he was as fast as anything. He could scare defences without doing much with the ball. I'm sure they just used to set him off, running up and down the pitch. You could see these big centre-halves looking at him thinking, I'm not marking him, he was jet-heeled. So it was fantastic when the young ones came in, and we were still at the bottom when we played Middlesbrough at home. 4-0. What a game. If you have a look at that on YouTube, that game, what a fantastic game. And off we went on this run. West Bromwich Albion 6-1, West Ham United 6-0. And off we went.
I was going to say, Kelvin, the strange thing about that is we scored, what was it, something like, 12, 16, 17 goals in 4 games. But before that, it was like, it was 10 games without scoring, or league games without scoring a goal. And I think in David Snowden's book, he said something about there was towards the end of that run, like the Arsenal Stoke time, there was a joke about someone saying, someone like was taking his dog for a walk and said, "Oh, he's really quiet" or something like that, and saying, he said, "Yeah, apparently he only barks when Sunderland score." And it says, "What? You've not heard him?" And he says, "No, I've only had the dog for 6 months."
Well, the old ones are the best.
Well, that's it. But then to go from that, I mean, it must have been from, like, as a fan going to the games, from like sublime to the ridiculous, to go from scoring like no goals in 10 to then 17 goals in 4 games.
I was checking the sat nav. There was no such thing in them days. But I'm thinking I'm at the wrong ground. That's not my team. Oh, it was fantastic, Chris. It was a glorious time. We went from dreadful, absolutely brutal, to euphoric. It was hard to credit. And the way we were playing as well, we weren't scruffing these games, scruffing goals. It was fantastic. Mel Holden, everything he touched went in or went to one of our players. It was fantastic to be watching us at that time. I mean, we only lost 3 games from, I'm trying to think, from early February through to the end of the season. Won 9, drew 7. Fantastic run we went on. I think I saw a stat saying that, if we'd replicated that in the season, it would have been us and Liverpool fighting for the top spot.
Yeah,
so
right.
it was a fantastic run, and we were as high as having been rooted at in bottom place when we came into that Everton game. We were in 16th position in the league, and we were the best placed of all the teams that potentially could go down. I think a load of Sunderland fans travelled to Goodison that night thinking, I think we've got this. I was certainly one of them. I was convinced it was going to be a nice end to the season.
Why were those games played on a Thursday?
It was a backlog of fixture pile-up. And I've tried to, because I've been asked that question before. I've tried to sort of look at why there was such a fixture pile up, and I cannot lay my finger on any one thing. Cup ties that required replays. The Man United and Liverpool factor that you were talking about there. Andrew's got something to say.
Well, I didn't know this for sure. I've just taken a look. It appears as if Everton had a decent cup run and have got as far as the semi-finals, which presumably has meant our game against them's being held back to the Thursday.
And remember, these are the days where they just kept playing replays and replays and replays until there was a winner.
You used to get some brilliant sort of series of FA Cup games, didn't you? You go in the 4th replay.
Didn't Everton and Liverpool? Everton and Liverpool, remember, late 80s, didn't they go to like 4 games or something like that? Brilliant.
Yeah.
Earlier in the season, we played at Old Trafford in a, I think it was the League Cup, and we drew Man United and were there for 3 games. It was Monty's last game. It was against Man United at Old Trafford. I'm pretty sure. I was at that game. Yeah, it was. They just ran and ran, didn't they? There was no penalty shootouts.
No, that's right.
Just keep playing.
And this obviously left a bad taste in everyone's mouth that's sort of lasted for quite a couple of generations, really, hasn't it? What was the immediate sort of, I guess, the feeling from Sunderland, Kelvin? Can you remember like what the club felt about all of this? Because nothing's going to be relegated, nothing's going to get changed. But what was the sort of feeling at the club?
Bear in mind that coming towards the end of our game, I mean, we played well that night in spells. We put a lot of pressure on Everton. They played like they had something to play for. Do you know, if Coventry and Bristol had played as hard as Everton played for the whole of their game, it might have been a different outcome. Everton actually, they put a right shift in that night, whether it was the atmosphere. It was a great atmosphere in the ground. I think that previous game that had 24,000 there. There's over 36,000 there. There's between 10 and 12,000 of us making a right racket. The atmosphere was great, and Everton put a shift in. There was a little lad actually playing for Everton who put a right shift in that night, who later came to us. Any ideas who that was? Mick Buckley. What a shift he put in that night. And I thought, I'll tell you, one of the things I did think when I could think logically about it was, that lad's a good player, we should buy him. And, when I could bear to think about it. And the other thing that happened, I mean, would come close where we after they scored, Bob Latchford scored, and then Mel Holden had a great diving header right afterwards. That could hardly be a minute past. Joe Bolton had a thunderbolt. There there was some really, really good chances. Di Davis playing in goals for Everton, he was inspired. Mick Lyons for Everton, he was a solid citizen, wasn't he? He put a shift in as well. I mean, they played like they had something to lose, So it was dead disappointing because as soon as the game had finished, the Goodison announcer said that Coventry had won. He announced
really?
that in the ground, and we all went absolutely crackers behind Di Davis's goal. I mean, it was just what we wanted to hear. There were loads of lads on tannoys, on the little handheld radios. There was a lot of that going on. But the reception in grounds was really rubbish. It came, it went. You didn't know where you were at. So it said that Coventry had won, which I think that's where I gauge how much extra, how delayed was that game, because up until 80 minutes, Coventry were winning. And that's why I don't think the announcer would have said that if he at Goodison. So there was a lot of celebration, which, we've lost the game, but what a season, and we're still up.
Yeah.
And oh my goodness, I can remember the announcer. I can still hear him. Correction. It's twos each. Oh God. And there were grown men crying behind Di Davis's goal. It was terrible. I think if somebody said we went in a transit van, we're sitting in the back of the van, boy, that's a miserable journey home. I loved going to away games in transit vans, but I blooming remember that one going home miserable. One of the lads said there, it might not have been half as bad if the announcer hadn't said that we'd won, because the set were, it just seemed to fit with the whole of the season. When you look at I mean, it's a cliche, but the low and the high of it was far too low and it was far too high to take some of us that season. So we were dealing with that as supporters coming home from the game. Afterwards, as I say, I went into hiding. If I'm honest, I couldn't deal sensibly with the fallout. I read a little bit about it. My dad spoke to us about it a bit. He never liked Jimmy Hill, and he was always on about him having a monopoly on, all sorts of things. He was, he quoted him as, he's like a power grabber. He used to call him, trying to grab power everywhere that he went. And certainly I could see when later on I could see what my dad was talking about with Jimmy Hill. He was an innovator, but he was Marmite. He was difficult. He was kind of difficult to like. I think a feeling of pride in the team for the journey that taken were on. I think a feeling like we're relegated. Let's go for this next season. Let's get behind the lads. We've got a good team there. We know we've got a good team. Let's get behind the lads. There's a good chance we can take ourselves straight back up again. I think I'm generalising there, and that was my view. Was despite the disappointment, we can come back up again, and we can move on in a positive kind of way. The only thing I would say in terms of the medium to long term looking forward, I always felt that Jimmy Adamson, he was never quite taken on board by the whole of the Sunderland support. There was something about him. If you watch his interviews, he comes across as a bit dour, and I think probably after Stockwell, it was difficult boots to fill. after Stoke, and he just never won the fans over completely. He replaced Jimmy Monty. He sold. It wasn't really him that sold Pop Robson, but if we believe what we were told, he sanctioned that. He said, "I just ship him out. I've got plans." And he just never won all of the fans over. But he had us playing some decent football. You have to credit him with seeing those young lads that he brought in. Kevin Arnott, I mean, that lad was playing on a month-to-month contract, when he got brought in. He wasn't sure he wanted to play professional football. When he got brought into the team and started playing, I've read that in a couple of different places, but he was fantastic. And him and Towers playing together, they were a force. Adamson changed the team on the night. If I had to be a little bit critical, and I'm going to talk about a player I love, Bobby Kerr. He brought Bobby Kerr in on the wing and asked him to play conventionally on the wing and get some balls over to Bob Lee and Mel Holden. And I don't that on the night that didn't quite work. It didn't quite work.
On that, Kelvin, because one of the big stories in David Snowden's book again was the fact that Jimmy Adamson tried to use it as some sort of kind of show of his power at the club by dropping Tony Towers in that game. He said there was a big kind of ruckus in the dressing room before the game because when he pinned the team sheet up, Towers wasn't in, and then after that, Towers was never the same with Adamson. But the other thing I want to go on what Martin's question was initially, just in terms of the aftermath. I mean, it's bizarre to me that they said they didn't do anything, and the FA said no, it was all fine, they were cleared, but yet they were still reprimanded by the Football Association. So if you reprimand someone, they've done something wrong, so they acknowledged they did something wrong, but cleared them at the same time, which was all very Football Association. The other thing, just in terms of the long-term thing with Coventry, Martin, was I don't think that the 96-97 was talked about enough when that game was delayed by 15 minutes as well. Yeah. We had to get to South London. They had to get to North London, yet they were all delayed by 15 minutes, and we got to Sellers Park on time. And actually, after the game, Alex Ferguson actually called it a disgrace after that game because it's much easier for the last 15 minutes when you know what you've got to do rather than the threat of what might happen over you. Yeah. And again, they survived.
And that's it, yeah.
You mentioned there the 15-minute delay at Coventry. At Spurs more recently, and the one at Coventry Bristol City. Thought it was very nice of them in the playoff semi-final as a tribute to that they stopped playing in the final 15 minutes of extra time. That was a lovely touch from them. It meant a lot.
You've stolen me final line, Andrew.
Oh, sorry, Kelvin.
Justice. We had to wait until 2025 for justice to be served.
Is a great minds think alike, a fool seldom differ. I can never remember.
Ooh.
But you had the David Speedy and Gary Bennett incident in '89 as well, which kind of threw all of this rivalry, gave it a different dimension anyway, didn't it? And that the whole thing with Jimmy Hill, at the time, and for all of us, watching Match of the Day and Sports Night and all that sort of stuff back in the day, Jimmy Hill was a regular on TV and regular on Match of the Day, wasn't he? And he was always a very sort of vocal person in football, even after he's retired and even after he hadn't got anything to do with Coventry. I remember Harry Enfield doing a sketch. Remember the Harry Enfield sketch with Jimmy Hill and Alan Hansen on Match of the Day, where Jimmy Hill exploded, which was quite good. But I remember a day at Fulham, and me and my mate had took our girlfriends down to London for the weekend, and we hadn't told them that there was a little trip to Craven Cottage on the Saturday afternoon to keep us entertained. And I'm sure this was the game It was a game when Roy Keane was in charge in the Premier League. It was a game before we played Newcastle. It was a game where Richardson hit the free kick and it hit the post. And at half time, we're all standing there, half time, you see a group of old blokes coming out from the corner to the left of the away end. And I don't know what the occasion was, but it was obviously some sort of celebration of Fulham's whatever team. And the crowd catch sight of Jimmy Hill. And for anybody who was in the away end that day at half time will remember vividly, because a few people spot him and there's a few shouts and a few chants at him. And Jimmy Hill at the start of it's laughing and joking along. He's nudging his former teammates, with his elbow and pointing, laughing and waving and all that sort of stuff. And the whole away end, eventually, very, very quickly, very quickly sort of got hold of the fact it was Jimmy Hill. And the whole away end was singing, chanting, everything under the sun you can imagine, calling him everything. And me and my mate, our girlfriends going, why are you shouting at that old bloke? That's disgusting. What are you doing? So you've got to give this whole backstory of 20-odd years of history, whilst calling Jimmy Hill a cheating bastard and all this sort of stuff. So it was, quite a...
Two quick things, Martin. First of all, you old romantic. And the second one... second one, apparently it was a pre-match tribute to Johnny Haynes, is what I've read.
Yeah, right. It was it was a funny old day. But yes, it almost seems it was kind of that storyline's come to a natural conclusion with events this week, which is quite nice.
Martin, what happened to the girlfriend?
Best not talk about that.
Okay.
now we're Fulham season ticket holder.
Yeah, and a big fan of Jimmy Hill. Chris has mentioned it a few times there. The David Snowden pod you did, Chris, and the book which has come out. As you say, it's quite the timing of it was quite apt. What with us playing Coventry again in the playoffs recently. I'm not as fast a reader as Chris. I know Chris has already rattled through the book. I'm playing catch up. That is a brilliant read. Kelvin was there at the time and lived this and has first-hand memories. But for somebody such as myself who has heard it spoken about so much, I wouldn't say enjoying it, because it was a difficult period in the club's history, but it is worth picking up if you can and looking through that book. It goes into good detail about the season we're talking about just there.
Yeah, it was much to that I was in the doghouse with the other half. It took 2 sittings over a bank holiday weekend. And as I said to David, actually, it's a bit of a spoiler in the title, A Fistful of Doldrums. He pretty much sums it up there and then.
Yeah.
Also on the 19th of May in 1953, Sunderland drew 3-3 in a friendly against a Swedish combined 11, which is interesting because Johnny Mapson, who had made his debut for the club in 1936, I think, had retired at the end of that season. But he got an emergency call. I think Harry Threadgold was the goalkeeper who was on the tour. He got an emergency call that Harry had got injured and Johnny Mapson flew out to Sweden to fill in and played a few more games that he wasn't expecting to. And when I was looking at that, I think Johnny Mapson lived the rest of his life in Sunderland. I recall the last game at Roker Park, he was part of the former players who came around and did a lap of honour, which when you think of the span of time there from somebody playing in 1936, which, it's an awful long time ago. When you got that connection, he obviously at Roker Park was there in the last game. I think he died a couple of years later after that, but a real sort of legend in goalkeeping terms at the club.
He was on the pitch. They made a presentation to him in 1973, I think, or did they just bring him out? And he got a raucous reception from the crowd. I think it was the Reading game.
Yeah.
Or was Reading or the Luton quarter-final. I can't quite remember which, but I always remember him being on the pitch and looking. I couldn't believe how sprightly he looked when he was bouncing around the pitch. I'm thinking, this lad played for us before, yeah. real legend at the club. My dad was a Newcastle fan, and he used to talk about some of our legends. I think he was always a bit jealous of some of these lads. Mapson definitely was one of the. He thought if Newcastle had Mapson as a goalie, we would have won everything. So, he was definitely one of the players that he would have had at his beloved team.
Another thing that cropped up in the David Snowden interview that he did, Chris, and obviously in his book, was the relationship, I guess, between the manager and Ian McFarlane, between Bob Stoker and Ian McFarlane. And on this day on the 19th of May in 1976, they were on the Australian tour, and Sunderland played an Australian 11 at the SCG, which is one of my favourite sports grounds in the world, I have to say. I think there was about 9,000 or 10,000 there watching that game, and I think that was kind of quite a fractious relationship, and some of the players didn't like the way that McFarlane had sort of carried himself on the tour, I believe.
Yeah, it was really interesting to hear that he was just in and around the place. Apparently, in some grounds and things, he wasn't particularly nice to at the time women who were serving behind bars in the kind of in the players' lounge in various places and things like this. But I think it also came out of the fact for the players' love of Arthur Cox as well. I think it kind of it spilled over from that. Arthur Cox. It was a bit of a surprise that Bob Stoker let him go as his number two. They were quite close. Obviously, Arthur Cox was on the bench in '73 when we won the cup as his number two. And I think, by the sounds of it, from obviously, not being around at the time, but everything I've read, the players loved him, and they presented him with a kind of fantastic watch when he left the club, and he treasured that and said it was one of his most treasured possessions in football. That that group of players, meant that much. He meant that much to them that they did that. So I think it would have taken a really good character to come in and replace someone like that who's loved. And it's funny because you do think about the Viv Busby, Dennis Smith thing when you think about this, that, two people who were that close, but the manager just thinks, I need a change. I need a different voice. And, he, instead of maybe adding to it, he kind of replaces something. And I think probably in the same way, maybe Dennis Smith slightly regretted it. You think, you wonder if Bob Stoker did as well.
And Arthur Cox obviously went on to manage Newcastle, didn't he, in the 80s? And he was always somebody who I thought, there's a Sunderland manager.
Yeah.
So, somebody should have managed us and never did. 19th of May 2013, we were beaten by a last-minute Gareth Bale goal that led to that rant by Paolo Di Canio where he pretty much threw everybody under the bus. I guess given that he'd already thrown a few players under the bus, Adam Mitchell and Billy Knott both came off the bench to make their only appearances, I think, for the club on that day. While on 20th of May 1909, we were beaten 2-1 in a friendly in Austria against Vienna Athletic Club. And I think in goal that day, there was somebody who we mentioned a couple of weeks ago, Lee Richmond Roos or Rouse, depending on how you... it's written in different ways. His surname's recorded in different ways in different places. But again, another book to add on to your summer reading list. In 1950, on this day, on the 19th of May, we beat Galatasaray 4-3 in a friendly in Istanbul. 2 goals from Len Shackleton, 1 each for Jack Stelling. I nearly said Jeff Stelling. That would be a good story. Jack Stelling and Tommy Wright in the tour of Turkey. While in 1957, Stan Anderson became the first England player ever to be sent off while he was playing in an under-23 game in Bulgaria. And the 20th of May is the date of the next game we're going to go and dive into. The year is 2015, and Dick Advocaat Sunderland travelled to London knowing that a point at Arsenal would keep them up. I think it was the second of last game of the season. Advocaat had come up into Sunderland to replace Gus Poyet in March after Gus kind of lost the plot a bit, Andrew.
He did. Now, I must apologise. As luck was have it, as soon as this section started talking, we started talking about this section, my next door neighbours, builders who were doing an extension, have decided to start work. They were noticeably quiet yesterday. I think they might have been at the semi-final game because there wasn't much.
You should buy them some flowers.
yeah. I'm sure they'll be impressed with a group of big burly builders and me turning up with a bunch of flowers.
You never
but yes,
know,
they're obviously deciding to catch up from yesterday's quieter day. But yes, Poyet had gone from a hero to yet another manager who's ended up having to leave. And the season, like a bit like the Coventry one, the Coventry Affair season that we've just spoken about, you had Stoko, who's this hero. He's produced cup miracles for Sunderland, and then over time it hasn't worked out, and somebody's come along to try and pull the team out of the relegation mire. That's exactly what's happened in 2015, which is a scary thing to think it was 10 years ago now, because it doesn't feel like it was a decade ago. But yet, Advocaat's come along. He's taken over from Poyet. He's pulled the team around. And thankfully, unlike in 1976-77, he was able to get the final point and keep our place in the top flight.
He didn't. My memory of him, he kind of came and he had a bit of a mixed sort of run of results, really. But he was a really sort of surprising name. But he was one that seemed to be like so. It was lined up, wasn't he? It was almost like they announced Poyet had been sacked, then half an hour later they announced Advocaat was coming in for the rest of the season.
Yeah, at the time it seemed a peculiar one. And it's only now, looking back at it, that I've realised seemingly the first contact with Advocaat had been, if you believe the reports, it had been 3 weeks before. Poyet had results at the start of the season would been plodding along. We were okay, but we always had this ability to press the self-destruct button. And once we conceded one goal, we then conceded a boatload. I mean, obviously there was the Southampton game. Even when we were playing okay, Poyet wanted us playing the ball at the back. It could be quite difficult to watch. I seem to remember a lot of 0-0 draws. He then went in, I don't know if you remember, but he penned an open letter to the supporters, which was perhaps, it was done for the right reasons, but I think it got a lot of supporters' backs up. So there was this background where people were starting to lose faith in Poyet. As I say, Advocaat, there's suggestions we'd made contact with him up to 3 weeks before. I didn't know him as a firefighter. He had a good reputation. He's won titles in lots of different divisions. Lots of different countries, sorry. He's managed international sides, but he'd never been known as somebody who could come in and pull a team who were at rock bottom up. Seemingly, though, the link was through our sporting director, Lee Congerton. I don't know if you remember him, lads. He had quite an influence at the time. He'd previously worked with Frank Arneson, who had been in a similar position at Chelsea, and it was Arneson who'd had a working relationship with Advocaat. I think he's the one who's come along and said, look, Poyet's not working. You've tried different managers in the past. You've tried different profiles. None of them have worked. Do you now want to go for a star name? Could he be the one who brings a lift to the club and gets everybody back on side? So that appears to be the thinking behind it. We often went at that time from one manager to a next, and there never really seemed to be a train of thought. There never seemed to be a manager would go in, we would replace them with a similar style. They seem to just rip things up and go again with a completely different setup. That looks to have been what's happened again with Dick Advocaat.
Yeah, there wasn't a great deal of joined-up thinking around at that time in terms of managerial recruitment, was there? And
no,
it was always a shame with Poyet, because I always liked him as a manager. I thought what he was trying to do was good. Obviously, we saw the Great Escape, we saw the Cup run, but that season it just felt as if it was kind of going from bad to worse. I think we had the FA Cup defeat at Bradford, and then the home game against Aston Villa, where we were 4-0 down at half time or something, weren't we?
Yeah, the Bradford game, I think, is when things really ramped up. A couple of days before, we managed to lose, and this is a catchphrase going forward for this podcast, typical Sunderland. We managed to lose at home to QPR, who I think they were rock bottom. They hadn't won away from home all season. They roll into town, pick up a win. We then lose to Bradford. Then this open letter comes out a couple of days after that, which has got people's backs up. And the Aston Villa game, again, typical Sunderland, they were the lowest scorers in the Premier League at that point, and yet within 45 minutes have scored 4 goals at the Stadium of Light. Everybody has... Because you're right, Poyet was a popular fella and he was trying to implement a plan. However, everybody's now had their fill. The 8-0 loss at Southampton, the failure to capitalise on games where we are in with a shout of getting a win. This week then comes along. We lose to Bradford. We lose to QPR. A few weeks after that comes along Aston Villa, and enough's enough. Time to go.
I think with the Bradford game, it was a 5th round, wasn't it? I think we got through a couple of harder looking ties on paper, and you think, oh, cup run, brilliant, another cup run, and you go down at Bradford, and then you had the whole Hull game the previous season where we rested a load of players where we could have got the semi. And I think we would have been in Europe if we'd got through to that game. So there was that kind of at the back of people's minds as well. But as the Advocaat came in, first game away at West Ham, up against Sam Allardyce, ironically enough, who ended up replacing them about 6 months later, didn't he? Second game against Newcastle at home with Defoe, which sparks things into life. We got stuffed the next game at home. It was kind of back to our old ways. It was Palace, wasn't it? Then we drew away at Stoke, beat Southampton at home, beat Everton away 2-0. Danny Graham scoring from 40 yards, as we sort of remembered a couple of weeks ago. Draws away at Leicester. Then going into this Arsenal game, we knew we needed a point. Now, Arsenal were a great side, but they were a great side. It looked a bit of a tough ask to go and get a point away at Arsenal. But when you you have the recollections of the game, but when you're reading the reports of the game, we didn't just sit back and defend for our lives. We made a real go of it and could have won it.
Yeah, you're right. Arsenal, I think, and it goes back to something we discussed with Kelvin there. Arsenal had got to the cup final, I believe. So they were the original game came after that heavy defeat to Crystal Palace. We were due to play Arsenal after getting thumped off Crystal Palace. Because of their cup involvement, the game got moved back. It's meant that we've got a game in hand on other teams at the bottom. It's then fallen at a time when we've hit form. As you say, at first we named an attacking team. I'm looking at the lineup now. Defoe started, Connor Wickham started, Danny Graham started on the back of that excellent goal at Everton, as you point out. Graham came off at half-time and was replaced by Stephen Fletcher. He, if my memory serves me correctly, had a couple of brilliant chances in the second half against Arsenal. We were backs to the wall at points in the game, and yet there were other opportunities where we could have scored. And don't get me wrong, just because Arsenal were in the cup final, they didn't rest players. It was a strong starting 11 they put out. They'd been a little bit hit and missy in the weeks prior, and I wonder if they saw a game against Sunderland just before the cup final as a bit of this could be an opportunity to get ourselves back into form. It didn't go like that. It ended up being a tense game, and we, as is so often the case in that era, we pulled ourselves out of the mire, and when it mattered most, we've produced a good, solid performance and got a 0-0 draw, which I think most people would suggest was a fair result. It wasn't a fluke.
No, absolutely.
We deserved it.
We did. And the memories I have of that game is watching Advocaat and his assistants come on the pitch. There was tears in their eyes because, they'd achieved what they wanted to. And, of course, Advocaat retired after and we played Chelsea in the last game of the season. Shortly after that, he retired. Cue a boatload of tulips or whatever there might have been heading over to his missus, and he all of that's reversed. But we all know what happened, and we'll go into different elements of this over the next few weeks. But he retired again not so long later, and right, this is definitely it. I'm definitely off. I need to put my feet up. Since leaving Sunderland, he's managed Fenerbahce, the Netherlands, Sparta Rotterdam, FC Utrecht, Feyenoord again, Iraq, Den Haag, and he's now head coach. And he has been for the last year. I don't even know how you pronounce it. Curacao?
Well, have you seen the price of flowers? He obviously doesn't. He doesn't want to have to keep forking out.
His missus must have a taste for them, mustn't she?
Yeah. But we have a bit of a joke about the way he came back and the way he's continued his career. You talk about he was on the pitch, he was crying. Ellis Short was at that game. He's watching from the stands. He's waving down at Advocaat. Obviously, pleased that this bit of a risk to bring him in is paid off. But we go back to this constant cycle we're in at that point. We go back to this question about, did the club have a long-term plan? Because we did. We brought him back over that summer when, for all intents and purposes, he was supposedly away. It was just going to be a quick stint in the Premier League. He'd always wanted to work in England, from what I can gather. With hindsight, I don't know if bringing him back was correct. One of Poyet's issues, for me, felt as if fans were sick of the relegation battles. We had a squad that could do well in the cups. We really should have been looking to progress to that fabled next stage as a club. We'd been in the Premier League long enough, and yet we weren't seeing progress. We kept getting back into this horrible repeating circle of being in relegation battles without any long-term strategy. We wanted to be doing well in cups. We wanted to be doing well in Europe. We wanted to be qualifying for Europe. We didn't want to be in this constant battle. Somebody would always come along, a bit like Adamson had all those years before, get the team out of relegation bother, but then we couldn't kick on. Congerton pulled a lot of strings behind the scenes at this point. He was buying players that Advocaat, when he did come back, didn't necessarily want. There was this whole imbalance behind the scenes, this query about what we were going to do next. And much as I loved Poyet, much as I loved Advocaat, they ended up leaving the club in as difficult a situation as they'd taken over. And we thought we then hit gold when Allardyce came in, but yet again, he goes, we're back to square one, we're circling the plug, and it all catches up with us.
One of the big issues I think we had in that little spell was we almost had that, it was almost a mixture of two models, wasn't it? We had the director of football, who was our sporting director, bringing some players in, but then Poyet brought in Bridcut and Buckley and people like that. In this summer, Advocaat brought in Jeremy and Lenz, who on face value looked a great player, but you couldn't actually fit him into any side that Allardyce wanted to play. So you had this kind of desperate thing where you're getting some sort of strategy here, then the manager's bringing his own players in as well, and it was just a mess when you look back on things.
It was, and even Defoe, shortly before Poyet went, we got Defoe in on that exchange deal with Altidore. Now, Defoe scored in, I think, Poyet's last win. It was a 2-0 victory over Burnley. And we thought, well, here we go. Are we going to see some of this progress? That didn't materialise. I don't know if Defoe necessarily worked for Poyet's style. It's only then when Advocaat comes along, Defoe scores in the obligatory win against Newcastle. You know, a new manager at Sunderland at that point basically meant you lost the first game. The second game, you beat the Mags. We had Defoe's volley, and towards the end of the season, Defoe starts fitting into the system better. I mean, going back again to the Arsenal game, famously, he actually drops back and is playing as like an auxiliary fullback at one point.
I think even in that Newcastle game, he played on the left wing.
Well, yeah.
Although he certainly wasn't set because Connor Wickham and Fletcher were up front.
That's right. Yes. But again, there you go. We've brought in one of the Premier League's most prolific goal scorers.
Let's play him right back.
Yeah, that does suggest that there is a breakdown between what the head coach or the manager, I assume they were still called a manager at that point, but they weren't a manager in the sense that we recognised it because there were other people giving them the plays and saying, go on, make a team out of that.
I was going to ask Chris if he liked Dick, but...
Crying Dick. I remember there was a few rather immature jokes on that evening afterwards.
If you wanted to, wouldn't it?
I heard Chris likes a glass of Advocaat too.
Love a snowball at Christmas, Kelvin.
Hey.
The 21st of May is a big date in recent Sunderland history. Just 3 years ago, we were celebrating at Wembley after Alex Neil's team secured a return to the Championship with a 2-0 win over Wickham. While the day after Sunderland beat Galatasaray in 1950, just a little pre-season relaxation tour it seems, we beat Fenerbahce 3-0. Just 24 hours later, another 2 goals from Tommy Wright and 1 for Ivor Broadus. Also on the 21st of May, Johnny Cochran, who we talked about in the first pod, who replaced Bob Kyle, was officially made Sunderland manager on this day in 1928. While in 2017, a Sunderland team who was already relegated did a really gutless and spineless and cringy thing at Stamford Bridge by all flocking over the tunnel on the 28th minute to line up to form a guard of honour for John Terry, which was just disgraceful. There was one ex-Sunderland player in the Chelsea lineup that day. Can anybody remember who that would have been?
I think we've all tried to forget that as best as possible because that's not. I've not got any names popping up in my head at the moment.
Yeah, I was going to say. I was going to say Gianfranco Zola, but I think that's just one of my dreams.
It's just a dream he had, Kelvin. He was brought in under Poyet on loan, and he was somebody who we all really quite desperate to keep permanently, but it never materialised.
The big Spanish lad, the fullback.
Alonso,
yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
The very next day after that game, David Moyes left the club about 300 days too late. While on the 23rd of May in 1976, Mel Holden scored all 5 goals in a 5-0 win over Tasmania as part of that tour of Australia. 24th of May saw Len Ashurst dismissed in 1985 after overseeing relegation, while Ricky Sprazier resigned after Sunderland's defeat to Chelsea, which also saw Newcastle relegated after losing to Aston Villa. On the 25th of May, in 1965, Jim Baxter became our record signing for £72,500, signing from Rangers. And the 25th of May in 1998 is the date of the last game that we're going to be talking about today. Now, we should preface this with a bit of a trigger warning, really, because I think we're probably all still suffering post-traumatic stress from this one, and we did question the wisdom of talking about this in the lead up to the 2025 playoff final, but we are going back to Wembley. Charlton Athletic are the opponents, Chris.
Yeah, because we all need a reminder about how painful playoff finals can be, don't we? Apparently, this is perfect timing. We talked about the semi-final on the last one and a bit on the season because look, I mean, just to get in the headspace going back to 1998, we were slightly disappointed, really, to have to be playing in the playoffs. I'm pretty sure, and I can't remember whether this was a fact, but I'm almost sure we were the first side to not go up automatically with 90 points. I'm pretty sure that was a fact, just the same one as 40 points. Is that right, Martin?
Well, I think the season before we were the first side to get relegated.
Yeah, with 40 points.
More than 40 points.
Yeah.
40 points or more. And then that's right. So we record breakers, but for the wrong reasons.
Typical Sunderland. If anyone could send us the final total of the tally chart of how many times we've said that in the podcast,
that's the name for this week's pod, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it. Typical Sunderland. Well, it's for every one of these podcasts. But yeah, you know those two draws against QPR. I'll never ever forget. It's ingrained in my mind, that moment. I can play the video of Mike Sheeran scoring that goal and the feeling afterwards. I was also at the Hawthorns when we drew 3-3 over that Easter weekend as well on the Monday. And then we lost at Ipswich, which pretty much blew it. But we were absolutely gutted because we were absolutely flying that season after that terrible start. First season at the Stadium Light, and we all thought that script was written and we were going to be promoted straight away. And it would have been a relatively new thing for us to go up and down like that because we'd spent so long in the second tier before Peter Reid then kind of jumped us up into the Premier League with that kind of surprise promotion in his first full season. So we went into the playoffs. We lost our first leg. We went over the second leg afterwards, which was just an epic. And then we're kind of preparing for this final. And, you know, back at this time when we're preparing to go to Wembley, Middlesbrough had already lost in the League Cup final. Arsenal had completely dismantled the Mags in the FA Cup final 9 days earlier than our trip to Wembley. And also Taulo had also lost in the FA Vase final. And at this point, it was our turn. So we'd seen all of these North-East sides go there and get beat, which was, even then, you're talking about 1998, which is only, I mean, bizarrely when you think about it, but it's only the 8th year that ninth year, that they were held at Wembley. That actually the playoffs still a relatively new thing then, because we were the first in 1990 to do that. So even then it was still kind of new, and it was still considered to be the richest game in football. I remember the tickets, everyone's kind of scrambling for tickets now for Wembley. I remember tickets then, everyone queued up around the Stadium of Light, and there was just queues that wrapped around. And I think there was an incident where they'd realised people had slept overnight and put up tents and things like that. And then in the morning, they'd realised they'd put the queue in the wrong place and somebody caught wind of it. So everybody kind of sprinted over to this new place, and people who'd been queuing up for kind of 24 hours were then kind of at the back of the queue because they had to leave tents and things like that. But it was just, so if people think it's chaos now, we can go back to then if you want and just have absolute chaos. But yeah, and then we kind of go into it. We're obviously looking for that quick return to the top flight. And we looked at the kind of, everyone was looking at the lineup. And in some ways, because of how that season panned out, this first 11 picked itself. And I think all of us who lived through that time and that year could pick that side. We could go, right, our 1 to 11 from when we kind of kicked in that season. Everyone can say this was our first 11, which was easy to do. The thing is, before this game, and it kind of takes us back, we mentioned it when we talked about the Sheffield United game, that Kevin Phillips picked up an injury in that second leg. That he was injured. Lee Clark was also suffering as well. But I think this was back in the day where I don't think telling Peter Reid was the best thing to do, to tell him that you had an injury and you were feeling something in this day, or else I don't think you would have missed out on that game. I think you would have left the club if you'd said you were feeling an injury. The other one, actually, because we interviewed him a good while ago, was Darren Holloway. He basically said he should have never have played. He said, you know, if he was completely honest with everyone, as footballers never are, in terms of injuries, that he wouldn't have played. He was feeling his back. He said he could hardly move, and he was kind of taking painkillers and all this sort of stuff. But it was that first 11. So it was almost like they felt part of that first 11 that come through ridiculous run of games where we hardly lost. And they were kind of together. So it was kind of all of those players weren't going to give it up easily. And going into the game, as we'll get into it, but Charlton hadn't actually conceded a goal in their last 10 games. Before this, which will make it all seem absolutely ridiculous. But yeah, I remember kind of it was a hot day, and and I think Gav actually mentioned on a recent podcast, but we played in possibly the worst strip for these conditions. I mean, I remember just walking about in it, and it was heavy. And if you sweated even a little bit,
it soaked up sweat, like, didn't it?
The weight of the strip just exponentially got
It was like a sponge.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, you could see how the players were sweating. And after even when they came on the pitch, because they were sweating a little bit, they looked knackered because their strips were just absolutely soaked through. But we came out, I remember the fireworks when it all went off, and Peter Reid and Alan Kirbishley dressed up like they were going to go to a wedding with big bloody flowers in their top pockets, like they used to do for the FA Cup final. But yeah, I remember all that. And then actually the game kicks off. And it's funny because, we look back to this. We look back to this game and everyone goes, "Oh, what a game!" And you look at the highlights and it goes, one of the best ever game at Wembley and all that. First 45 minutes was pretty awful. I mean, it was a proper bitty game. Yeah. I remember the referee completely kind of spoiling that first half. He gave 5 yellow cards in the first 45 minutes, and it wasn't a dirty game whatsoever. But the only real kind of chance in the whole half ended up in a goal. That man Clive Mendonca, who we'll mention again and again, free 3 goals. It was a long throw in. Mark Bright, it was you forget Mark Bright was in that Charlton team. Flicked it on, and it came to Clive Mendonca. And to be fair, I always thought Clive Mendonca was okay when he was at Grimsby, but I can't remember him ever being this good, because he took that ball in from that long throw in and took Jody Craddock and Darren Williams completely out of the game by flicking it in behind him. And then he was 1-on-1 with Perez and slotted it home. But yeah, that was it for the first half. We got in half time. And from what we've heard from various people after, that Peter Reid put a rocket up them, and Darren Holloway actually came off for Chris Macon. But it's funny, I don't know anybody else's memories who was at Wembley who remembers going in at half time thinking, oh God, it's one of those playoff finals where it's just tight and nothing's really happening.
No, you're kind of thinking it's going to be a very tight game, maybe one goal in it. And you say Clive Mendonca scored that goal. And Clive Mendonca he was born in London, but he was brought up in Sunderland, wasn't he? He was a Sunderland supporter as a lad. And memory plays, or time plays tricks on your memory, because you kind of think, Clive Mendonca was one of those players who always scored against us. Before this game, he'd only ever scored 2 goals against us, one from the penalty spot, both for Grimsby. And he had as Chris said, he had a good record for Grimsby. He was a 1-3 striker at Grimsby. Goes to Charlton, becomes a 1-2 striker. I think he got almost 50 goals in about 100 appearances for Charlton. So he sort of got his goal scoring boots on there. But that goal, Chris said there was only one chance in the first half. I would say that's not a chance. He turns beautifully, comes in, finishes, and he scores an absolute cracker to put Charlton 1-0 up. Second half starts though, Andrew, and it's a different game, isn't it? There's a feeling about the support. You're coming into this, you've got 45 minutes, make or break, it's do or die. This is it for the season. And there's been such momentum built up going into this game throughout the course of the season. As Chris had sort of outlined, that end of the season, we'd only missed out on promotion on the last day. But there seemed a real determination within the squad after Peter Reid's rocket to get back into the game.
Yeah, definitely. And you're right. They've obviously been getting the hairdryer treatment at Wembley at half time. But there was this belief around the side, because of the football they'd been playing. The season hadn't started very well. There was maybe an element of us finding our feet at the Stadium of Light. Then there's that famous game at Reading, which I believe we've touched on before. Mm-hmm. After that point, it looks like we're a different team. We are attacking, we are scoring all sorts of brilliant goals. And I think there's perhaps an attitude in the second half of, this game's going to drift away from us here. We can't let that happen. We need to be the Sunderland we've been for the last few months and go out there and let our attacking flair get us back into it.
And we got back into it pretty quickly, Kelvin. I think 5 minutes into the second half, we win a corner, kicking towards our fans. Corner comes in now. Quinn, when you watch the video back, Quinny makes a beautiful run to the near post. He sprinted like you've never seen Niall Quinn sprint before, and he gets ahead of it. 1-1.
Fantastic goal that he scored. I think it's one of his. He definitely references that goal quite a bit. One of his favourite goals, and I mean he couldn't have kicked that ball harder.
No.
But he headed it, and in it goes, and it lights the touch paper, I think. I wasn't sure whether one of the things I can't remember where I read this about what Reid said to Kevin Phillips at halftime. Just go for it, you're injured, don't worry about it. Just give us what you've got, and I'll deal with that if you cannot play on. We came out a different team. Quinny gets that goal. Phillips follows up with a good goal as well. About 8 minutes later, it was quite interesting. You're gonna laugh when I tell you this. We may have been kicking towards our fans in the second half, but I was in amongst the Charlton fans that day because I couldn't get a ticket.
There's a pattern emerging here, Kelvin.
But it was blooming interesting listening to them, because the lads that were closer to me, I mean, we ended up having a good crack, and them lads were big Mendonca fans. They told me he would do business, but Craddock and Williams, you would have thought. Craddock and Williams, they were built for that kind of forward, I was more scared of Mark Bright than I was of Craddock and Williams, quite fleet-footed, quite sharp, but he did them. Sorry, Andrew.
Well, I mean, this is a very important question, Kelvin. I have to jump in. Please tell me your tickets for the playoff final are going to be in the Sheffield United end, because obviously this is how it has to be.
With the way that this turns out, maybe better not.
Oh, fair point. Fair point. The Phillips goal. I've got a vague memory. Am I right in thinking that when he scored, he equalled a Brian Clough record?
He did.
It was his 35th of the season, wasn't it? It was Brian Clough's post-war record, wasn't it?
That was it, yeah.
The best thing about that Phillips goal is how it's set up. And anybody who wants to see what Kevin Ball brought to Sunderland's midfield, that single incident typifies everything that you need to know about Ball. He played in midfield. There is no way he should win that ball. There's no way he wins that ball.
He wasn't. I don't think he was even second favourite to win that ball in the air, because he took a 20 yard run up, and there was three players ready to wait in the head of the ball when it kind of came down, and he just sprinted up and leapt. I always remember, because in my mind it was funny because Kelvin, his kind of Spartacus memory, and it's funny because I remember a diving header at Roker Park against Chelsea, and in my mind Kevin Ball flew from the halfway line to make contact with the ball. And it's one of these that kind of grows legs over years. But it's funny because as we get through it, I mean, you talk about finishes and you talk about Kevin Phillips, and you see kind of reels of his goals time and time again, outside the box, curls and all this sort of stuff. But you'll see in this game that even this goal, which is probably one of the more simpler of all the goals, there's some really good goals in this game.
Yeah.
They're all kind of high quality.
There is.
And it's funny because Kevin Phillips is doing this while hobbling through on goal as well.
That's right. But this Phillips goal, again, when you look back at some of the goals Phillips scored, he was such a good player. And I know it's easy to take it for granted just how many goals he scored, but the variety of goals he scored was immense. He was a Johnny on the spot, getting tap-ins. I think the one against Sheffield United in the semi was a tap-in. This was a lovely first touch finish. He could score from 30 yards. He would score his fair share of headers, and for a relatively small bloke, he was powerful in the air. But Phillips, as you say, was carrying an injury, and Mendonca equalised on 71. So we've only been in the lead for less than a quarter of an hour. Mendonca equalised on 71. Phillips is struggling. Danny Dichio was warming up to replace him. I think Dichio had been signed in December, I think, from Sampdoria. I remember, obviously, you're talking back in the time of not very much internet. The internet was around, but you didn't have mobile phones with the internet on, all that sort of stuff. And I was at university in Leeds, and I was sharing a house with some of my mates, and we put teletext on, and the top of the headline was a 401, Sunderland sign striker from Sampdoria. So Sunderland sign Italian striker from Sampdoria. And you go, fucking hell, who's this? Who's this? That's 401. Sunderland have signed Daniel Dichio. You go, oh, yeah, man. So that was, talk about going from highs and lows with Everton and Coventry, Kelvin. That was a highs and lows moment for us there.
I had a similar experience with Emerson Thome when we'd signed a Brazilian centre-half, and I thought, wow, brilliant, we're going to be playing all this nice football right from the back. Yeah. That boy was the most British centre-half you could have wished for.
The only Brazilian footballer who couldn't pass 10 yards, I think, Emerson Thome.
There were two things, just quickly on that goal. It actually showed us, we were brilliant throughout that season, but everyone, and everyone talks about that back four that kind of came together. But, we were so tight and played so well that season, hardly conceded any goals, and brilliant going forward. But it just shows in a playoff final, and again, I don't want to start frightening everyone for what's to come, in the modern day. But sometimes all of that just goes out the window, because that goal from Charlton, 71 minutes, everyone's getting a bit tetchy, the game's changing and just going into kind of this organised chaos that's happening in front of us. And it's a ball over the top that Craddock and Williams just, they deal with that on a normal daily basis. Yeah. Don't deal with it. And it also showed the, and I thought he was a great shot stopper, Lionel Perez. We talked about his heroics against Sheffield United, but it showed like when Mendonca went clean through and he kind of just, he slightly made it easy for Mendonca to slide it underneath him. That he did have his weaknesses, and we'll come on to crosses in a minute. But I wanted to mention as well that there was a big incident 2 minutes later after this goal. We were talking about Kevin Phillips carrying a knock. We talked about him scoring the goal. 2 minutes later, he's completely wiped out by Eddie Youds when he went up for a header. That basically, that was the end of his game. But, the ball went out wide to Summerby in that move. He laid it out to Lee Clark. And then he cut inside on his left foot and crossed it to the back post. And I tell you what, all of us were lucky enough to witness Niall Quinn. And it's funny now, because I think now the modern day kids are probably the way I was when my dad talked about maybe Len Shackleton and all that sort of stuff, where I might raise an eyebrow and go, "Oh, was he that good?" Yeah,
of course he was.
Yeah, of course he was. Yeah, he flipped a coin into his top pocket, did he? Yeah, okay, yeah, whatever. But if you're talking about young kids and you go, "Oh, Niall Quinn was a brilliant player," you'd go to this goal, or this is one of them where, in this pressure cooker, that ball to the back post by Lee Clark is a nothing ball, really. I mean, he's got no right to produce something from that position.
No.
But to read the ball going over the defender's head and give him the little Niall Quinn trademark little shove, so he goes a yard underneath the ball, and then to take the ball on his chest and to volley it home. I mean, that's Niall Quinn all over. That is vintage Niall Quinn. I mean, he was that good.
And, you bear in mind that he was, 3 or 4, 5 months after almost retiring. I think he'd come back in November, so maybe a little bit longer, but he'd been on the verge of... So this was really the first spell that we're actually seeing the real Niall Quinn and Sunderland supporters, aren't we? And, you kind of produce something like that. We saw it a number of times in the next couple of seasons. I remember the Chelsea game, a game at home against Spurs, I think. I recall him scoring something similar, where he lets the ball drift over, brings it down his chest and just volleys it home. Yeah. But to do this at this stage of the game, in front of that crowd, brilliant.
Oh, unbelievable. And in the aftermath, we're all celebrating. But actually, I remember at the time not even noticing that because I mentioned Phillips was left in a heap by Eddie Howds. And I remember being at the stadium and just celebrating, going crazy with 3-2 up, we're going to win this. And then when it kicked off, I remember thinking, where's Kevin Phillips?
Yeah.
Because it was in the celebrations that Kevin Phillips kind of hobbled off. Sunderland players were celebrating, and Danny Dichio came on like Martin said. And then it was literally 2 minutes after he'd come on where, there's only 15 minutes left on the clock, and you've got a Chris Macon throw in down the line to Quinn. He sent it down the line to Summerby, and Summerby crosses the ball like he did. And this is 2 minutes after he's come on. It was there to make it 4-2 potentially.
Oh,
and then
we'll see that at night.
I know he went with it with his right foot, and then it hit off his standing left leg and just rolled into the arms of Illich from 10 yards out. And that should have been game over.
That challenge by Youds on Phillips, if that doesn't happen, we go up 100%.
Yeah. That Youds challenge. So I'm in the Charlton end. They are absolutely ecstatic at that challenge. They're celebrating that. And
it got them
we score. Yeah. Absolutely. So it was a really weird moment that, and I did notice him going off. Obviously, because I'm not surrounded by loads of people jumping up and down. No, it was a hellish challenge on a boy that was already carrying an injury. But Dan Dichio, as you say, comes on and oh my goodness.
There's a number. I never liked Dichio after this game. That miss was one reason. There will be another reason that we come on to, but I would never have him after this. Oh, actually, no, there's 3 reasons, which I'll tell you later.
Well, you'll probably think of a few more by the time we get to the end of this game.
Don't be sitting on the fence there, Martin.
I don't know if I can avoid this, Kelvin.
You were joking earlier, Martin, asking Chris if he liked Dick. You've just said there that you used to like Dichio, but you no longer like Dichio. So, people in glass houses, Martin.
We go in the last 5 minutes. Are we going, Chris?
Well, yeah. I was going to say, basically this miss, and it's interesting if you watch the game back, that this miss starts it basically flips the game, because Charlton start building momentum as soon as Dichio misses this chance. And it's such a bizarre thing in football how this happens sometimes, after a chance, after a tackle, after a yellow card, sometimes it just takes one single incident to just flip a game. And this was it, because Charlton started to build up pressure, build up momentum. Perez made actually a really good stop from a free kick. And then 2 minutes after that, Charlton gets a corner. And they swing the ball in, and Lionel Perez loses his head and charges kind of needlessly into the crowd of players ahead of him, and then basically underneath the ball. And Richard Rufus kind of rolls the tallest at the back of this crowd, and Perez just he's wearing a bright coloured top, and he just disappears into this crowd. You can't even see where he is. And Rufus just heads into an empty net. And it's interesting because at the time, I know someone, and this is third hand, so it might not be true, but I know someone apparently who sat close to the bench that day. And apparently Peter Reid's words were, coming back to the bench, was he'll never play for this club again. In terms of Lionel Perez,
he didn't, did he?
And he didn't. And he said that straight away after the game. He was telling me kind of this story that apparently that was true.
Well, the Perez thing was a bit funny, really, wasn't it? Because he'd arrived basically as Tony Coton's backup the season before. Hadn't really played. Well, he obviously never played in England, but I don't think anybody ever envisaged him playing for us.
Yeah.
I think he's brought to sit on the bench, a bit more experience than David Priest could provide, who was the other goalkeeper at the time. Coton got injured at Southampton. Perez came in, and he did all right. But again, I think if you've got if Tony Courtin had stayed fit that season, we stay up, because I think Perez, ultimately a better goalkeeper than Perez, would have kept us up, because we only went down by such a slight margin. Peter Reid signed Zoltan Bayer, intending for him to be the first choice goalkeeper, and for whatever reason he didn't work out. So we were kind of stuck with Perez. But I always felt that Reid never, even at the start before this game, before, even when we went down from the top flight, Peter Reid never fancied Perez.
I think the reason Zoltan Bayer didn't work out was the horrific sweater he wore when he signed. I mean, if you dig out the photos, it looked even heavier than that shirt they were wearing at Wembley. Perez, just touching on Perez, you said there nobody envisaged him becoming a regular. I obviously took a bit of a shine to him because I was young and daft at the time, and insisted when my mum and dad brought a new black cat into the house, our new pet, I insisted we called it Perez, which I didn't think through, because it meant even when he'd left, he'd moved on. I think he actually went to Newcastle.
He did go to Newcastle.
Yeah, there was me stood in the back lane on a night trying to get the cat to come back in the house, shouting Perez at the top of my voice in the middle of the night, which didn't really look too clever, I don't think. So yeah, if nothing else, I wish Reid had kept him at the club just to save me that little bit of embarrassment.
The Sunderland defenders were probably shouting the same, mate, looking for him.
Yeah.
Did Lionel the cat just randomly jump and at random times? And
went
missing.
again.
Yes, went missing.
Well, in the season before, I was staggered that actually Peter Reid didn't stick his mate Chris Woods in goal when he brought him in. Because I was sure when he first came in, I thought he's going straight into the team, and I was surprised it never happened actually when he came. But yeah, we did get into extra time. There was only 5 minutes left after this, so 3-3 at normal time. And it's funny because you mentioned, Martin, about you think that Richard Rufus goal, and you almost think that's the last kick of the ball before penalties.
No, that's how I remember this. When I kind of looked back on the game before I started reading stuff to refresh my memory, in my head I would have put a tenner on that Rufus goal being the equaliser at the end of the game. But interestingly, when I was looking at this, Richard Rufus is in jail now. Money laundering.
I remember reading that. Yeah,
there you go.
I think Reid would put Perez in jail with him if he could.
If he had his way, he would.
Yeah. Well, it went in extra time. Oh, sorry, go on, Kelvin.
I was just going to say, so Rufus gets Charlton out of jail. Now he's back in jail. Right. Okay.
Very good.
Carry on, Mark. Carry on.
I should remember to leave a pause at the end of every little story like that, because I'm sure Kelvin's going to have a one-liner. But yeah, did get in extra time. We only had 5 minutes to play out. And then we got in extra time, and we said the momentum swung to Charlton in those later stages. But actually, in extra time, it looked like there was only going to be one team who was going to win it, and that was Sunderland. It looked like Coventry were out on their feet, even though we were in sweat-drenched gold. And our players looked absolutely knackered. But it came 9 minutes into the first period of extra time. Mickey Gray sticking it into Alcuin's feet. And then he laid it off to Summerby, who I don't think he actually did this enough, if you think back. I mean, look, don't get us wrong. His home was the touchline, and we all know that. It was like, don't leave home, don't stray too far away from that touchline. Peter Reid had him locked to that touchline to whip the ball in. But he didn't do this enough, and he ventured into the centre for some bizarre reason. Who knows why? But when Alcuin laid the ball off to him, he absolutely smashed it into the corner to stick us 4-3 up. And I remember at this time, it felt like because we kept going ahead and they kept nipping it back, it just felt like we were screaming at them that this was our day. Like, stop equalising. It's like...
Well, at this point, I thought this was our day. If you remember at this time in football, there was golden goal, silver goal. You didn't play out extra time and finish the 120 minutes. World Cup had golden goal. So myself and everyone around me, when somebody scored, thought we were up because we thought it was golden goal.
Ah.
And we were celebrating. We were jumping all over the seats. We were going everywhere. And then they kick off again. You go, why are they kicking off again? And then you realise, oh, shit, it's not golden goal.
See, genuinely, I remember at the end of full time, because I bought a programme like I always used to back in the day, but I remember reading in the programme, and it told you the details in the programme that there was no golden goal.
Good for you. I'm glad for you, Chris. Well done, mate.
But I do remember there was people, I don't remember this one, but actually we had to tell a few.
Well, you probably told me.
That's bizarre to think, because I've wiped so much from my memory that day that actually it could well have been you sitting right in front of us. Right? But
there were Charlton fans that thought it was golden goal as well. They were crestfallen, and they almost had me convinced that it was golden goal.
I didn't certain. The thing that happens a minute after this goal, Chris, Lee Clark goes off.
He does, yeah. Alex Ray comes on for him, and Lee Clark had been absolutely fantastic in this game.
Well, Lee Clark was absolutely fantastic. Full stop.
He was.
He take everything else away. He's still one of my favourite players to play for. So I just thought he was everything a centre midfield player should be.
Yeah,
absolutely brilliant.
And actually, he was carrying a knock as well, but he went down with cramp, and that was actually the reason what ended up doing him in this game. But you're right, because I remember him signing for us, Martin, and I remember the day we signed him thinking, because it broke our transfer record, which used to be Niall Quinn for 1.3. And then Clark came in for 2.5.
Yeah.
And I was thinking at the time, on the day he got called up by Glenn Hoddle to Le Tournoi.
That's right.
Yeah, for the England squad. And I remember thinking, because I always thought he was okay. I didn't think he was bad, didn't think he was great. But I just thought, what's the fuss? And then he started playing for us in that second division, and people talk about Ahmad and Lefay and all this sort of stuff being a cheat code. I mean, Lee Clark was probably the original in that division for Sunderland, because he just ran every single game. He could be that pivot in midfield. He could get forward and score goals. Yeah. He could get back and tackle, and he was potentially one of the last. I would say, I don't know. This might be a statement, but one of the last really top midfielders for Sunderland who was properly box to box. I don't think you get midfielders like that anymore.
No, you don't. And it's such a shame that we did not get to see him play in the Premier League for us, because his career would have been different as well.
Yeah, yeah. And I think he got a manager in Peter Reid who loved him.
Yeah. It was a great partnership, wasn't it? Ball, and him, Ball winning tackles and just giving the ball to him to play.
It is. He did, but it's interesting because Bally missed a huge chunk of that season through injury, didn't he?
Yeah.
And Lee Clark, we actually gave Lee Clark the captaincy. So Lee Clark had captained the side from probably the end of October or early November through till February, March time. And I think it was Clark and Alex Ray played a lot together in the centre midfield. But the two of them, you're right, because I think they were both at Fulham, weren't they, when they left the club. And I think they've got a good relationship. Yeah. Like Clark was such a good midfield player for us.
Yeah. I loved reading the story in Peter Reid's book about how he got him to sign for us. Basically, he got him absolutely smashed. At the beginning of the conversation, Lee Clark wasn't having any of it, and by the end of a couple of bottles of Chablis or whatever they had, he was well and truly ready to sign on the dotted line for us. But yeah, I mean, it was only 4 minutes later, after that substitution, that Charlton scored again, and this was the last goal of the game before penalties. But again, we go back to Clive Mendonca and some of these goals. This ball was absolutely just smashed across the 6-yard box, and it was smashed so hard it almost looked innocuous, that in the fact that it was hit so hard, and you thought, well, this is just going to go out on and play the other side. And his touch 6 yards out was unbelievable, because actually he made a touch, and before he was between Chris Makin and Darren Williams, and before the ball hit the ground, he turned and he pivoted and then just smashed it in beyond Perez before anyone could react to his first touch. And it was almost at the end, when the game was played out, it was this bizarre thing that, and you think back to, God, that I watched that fight against Eubank and Ben a few weeks back or whenever it was. And the end of this game was almost like the end of that fight, where there was just two teams just trying to slug like punches at each other, absolutely knackered. The fans, we were just exhausted looking at each other, shaking our heads in the stand. And it was really strange, because after a game like that, you've got these two teams, and penalties just seem all wrong. We were talking about those, replays earlier in the thing. And it's almost like, at that point, it's almost like, lads, look, we'll go at it again next week. We'll do it all again.
A more fitting way to resolve it, I think, wouldn't it?
Yeah, well, that's it. And but it was a necessity that we had to go through it. And it was funny, because at this time, you talked about checking things at full time or whatever. When the team start bunching up in the middle, and we started talking about penalties and, oh no, what's going to happen? And then you go, who's going to take them? And then you realise Kevin Phillips and Lee Clark have gone off the pitch.
Yeah. And Darren Holloway, who used to take a good penalty.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so these players had gone off. And you're starting to think, right, okay, who's going to be our list of players? But we've got some attacking players in there, but actually some of the better players have maybe gone off in terms of who you'd stick your hat on for those penalties. And then you've got Mendonca probably predictably stepping up for them first, and then Summerby, who's probably gutted that he hasn't actually won the whole thing for us and got us promoted. And then there was, Johnston stepped up for us 2-2. Kevin Ball, you had Kinsella stepping up for them. And then Chris Makin steps up when it's 4-3 to Charlton. And I don't know if you remember this one, but he hits it straight at the keeper pretty much, who at this point, Illich's hands are made of, they're just 2 packets of crisps. And he just palms it back over the line. And it was that point you start wondering what the hell is going to happen next. And then Alex Ray and Niall Quinn all did the business, 6-6. And then I'll probably hand over to you, Martin, because I imagine, and I'm just completely guessing here, but this is your second reason you wanted to speak about Ditcho?
Absolutely. You're down to the 7th penalty taker out of 11 players on the pitch. Take the goalkeeper out of the equation, so you've got 10 players. You've got an Italian superstar striker signed in a big money move from Sampdoria, who doesn't want to take a penalty at Wembley. Like, how way, man? Like seriously, what sort of bloody player does not stand up there? If you're a striker, why do you not take a penalty? I just cannot fathom that. And you look at the other players that didn't take a penalty. Jody Craddock, Darren Williams, young lads who've just come into the side. You can find them not stepping up. Dickie is a striker. He's paid to score goals. His job is to bloody strike the ball. And I don't care if he was nervous after his miss or what have you. Unless his leg's fallen off, he should be taking one.
Well, I might be doing him a disservice, but I'm sure at this point his socks were down by his ankles. And
he was not taking one. And I'll tell you the third reason.
Go on,
Next season, we play Oxford at home. Niall Quinn and Kevin Phillips both out injured. We get a penalty. Who grabs the ball? Dickie O. I tell you what, man. I cannot have him at all. And you can tell I've buried this for years.
Oh, dear.
Because this has always bugged me.
Talking about...
I'll add some fuel to your fire, Martin. Apparently Niall Quinn had never taken a penalty in his professional career. And he stepped up and took one. Obviously, he's already hit the
Don't
back
tell
of
him
the
that, Kelvin. Don't tell him that, Kelvin. He's already upset enough as it is.
Well, no, when you look at Quinny takes the sixth one. He's already let Chris Macon take one.
Yeah.
So, you can apply the same thing to Quinny, but at least Quinny stepped up eventually.
And you've got obviously Kevin Ball, who, basically he's not a penalty taker. He's not that type of player, but his hand, he's straight. His hands up, and he's like, yeah.
He had taken a few in the past, hadn't he? But he had a pretty indifferent record. I know he'd...
Awful record.
Well, I remember him scoring one on New Year's Day against Southampton in maybe New Year's Day 91. He missed one at QPR at some point.
Crystal Palace? Not Swindon. Was it Terry Butcher's first game?
Well,
Terry Butcher's first game?
He also missed one at home. Because I think him and Gordon Armstrong missed in Terry Butcher's first game when we got beat 1-0.
Yeah.
So Bally didn't have a great record at penalties, but he stepped up and I tell you, Dickie, old man, he should.
Do you want to hang on at the end of the recording, Martin, and we'll talk this through?
Well, talking about Perez as well with these penalties, because actually Lionel Perez didn't get close to not one single penalty. I mean, there was we had
Perez.
Lionel Perez had never ever saved a penalty in his professional career either. I don't know if were you just about to tell us that he never saved one. He never looked like saving one.
Well,
he didn't.
Well, that's it. I don't think it was a surprise to anyone if you watch back through these penalties. But he didn't get a sniff of any of them. And we had the heart attack with Chris Macon. I think from memory, Alan Johnson's wasn't great, but we had a few heart attacks actually during the shootout, leading up to it. Charlton's all seemed quite comfortable and without any drama, but ours of course did. And then look. And let's say these words, and up steps Mickey Gray, because, then it happened. But it was such a strange thing because at that point, 6-6, you saw Mickey Gray walking up. And you know what it was? I mean, we were nervous for the others, but we saw them walk up and it was like, oh, right, it's so-and-so. But I tell you what, when Mickey Gray walked up, everyone was watching him walk up and it was almost this realization he just doesn't look up for this at all. You could tell by the way he just walked up.
Well, he took a penalty the season before, hadn't he, at Liverpool in the League Cup.
Yeah.
And it was bloody awful as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And you could just tell by the way he was walking up, you could tell that he was nervous. But to be fair, look, you've already said this, Martin, that you can't knock anyone in a penalty shootout.
Absolutely not.
Give us the ball.
No.
You can't knock anyone. And look, I don't think we need to kind of go over that. It was an awful penalty. Illich just needed to lie down and wait for the ball to arrive at him, unfortunately. Not sure it would have actually quite reached the goal line, to be honest, from memory. But look, we're all gutted for him. And it shouldn't, unbelievable game. There's argument to say that it shouldn't have come to that and all that sort of stuff. But it'll always go back to, and coming out the ground, I always remember my memory was, because Wembley was dropping to bits at this point. It was an absolute shithole, basically, if we're calling a spade. I remember the Portaloos were all leaking, and Charlton was celebrating, and over the public address system, there was I'm walking on sunshine. And I was actually walking through a puddle of piss, coming out the ground, listening to "I'm Walking on Sunshine." It was that sort of day. But I loved reading Niall Quinn's book about after this game, because basically the season after, the 105 points comes after the hours after this game, because there was apparently a request from the. I'll say the WAGs, the wives and girlfriends, to mix up the coaches. And they wanted to have wives and girlfriends and players on both different coaches. And Peter Reid apparently just went, ask Bobby. And he just went, no chance. Said, the players coach is sacred. We're having the players coach, and there's going to be a separate wives and girlfriends coach. And apparently in Quinn's book, he says something like, it was silent, on the coach. And then he said, this typifies what the squad was like, where he said, Richard Ord, who was wearing a suit that day, who hadn't been involved in the squad, just starts up a song and everyone starts singing along to it and the squad starts singing. And he said they go for a piss up on the way back. And basically, Mickey Gray comes back with bleached blonde hair, gets back into the England squad. We get 105 points, finish seventh twice in the league. But it all comes from those hours after that game.
I think there's this whole thing about Niall Quinn rallying everybody, and next year it's going to be our year and all that sort of stuff. But I think really without this game, we might not do what we did the next season, because I think this game made Reid's mind up about Perez. We get Sorensen in, who's pivotal in that. I think it also made his mind up about Darren Williams and Jody Craddock as a partnership at the back, and we got Paul Butler and brought Andy Melville back in, and they were kind of pivotal in that defence for the season after. I remember a couple of days after the Charlton game, I don't think I could physically speak to anybody for 3 or 4 days after that. I was just in a daze. But England were playing cricket at Headingley a few days afterwards, and I had tickets to go to that, which I used to do when I lived in Leeds, going for a day on the bays. I think I go in. I was talking to somebody about lunchtime. It's fairly early on in proceedings, given that the cricket starts at 11, and you have a couple of beers just to sort of wet your palate. At lunchtime, somebody goes, "Have a look through that door," and there's Mickey Gray passed out. Peter Reid's with him, and Peter Reid's took him out. Peter Reid looked after Mickey Gray for that week afterwards, took him out, went to cricket on the beers, and really got him back to then do what he did, because Mickey Gray was a brilliant player for us for a long time. And that part, next season, that partnership with Alan Johnson down the left, which developed during the course of this season that we've talked about. And again, like that season afterwards was one of the most enjoyable to watch. And if we go up in that playoff final, we don't get that season. So you go, well, look, we actually end up being a better side for having that next season, and we managed to keep everybody together. We wouldn't keep everybody together if that happened now. You'd have people after Kevin Phillips, you'd probably have people after Niall Quinn, Lee Clark, all these sort of players. You'd have 7 or 8 of them who just get picked off. And we were able to keep that side together, and we were a better side for it.
I always remember just coming back to the actual finish of the penners, and all the players rallying round Gray, who's distraught, and the Bobby Saxton comes on the pitch. So Reedy's got his arm over Gray's shoulder. Saxton comes on, and Quinny alludes to this. Apparently he walked up to him and said, "That's the shittest penalty I've ever seen taken in my life," and walks off. Gray's distraught, inconsolable in the dressing room, gets on the bus. And actually that story, Chris, you were telling about the wives, I think it was Bobby Saxton's wife, if I remember well, that was trying to do the negotiation to get them on the bus, and he wasn't having it. He says, "Nah." And apparently in the journey to the pub, Sacco, I don't know if you can remember, Gray had a little bit of trouble earlier in the season where a local nightclub manager had complained about him to the club, saying he's arrived, he keeps arriving inebriated, under the influence, and he gives us the old "do you know who I am" kind of story. And apparently Sacco, referring to that, had said to him, "Aye, Mickey, when you're going back to that club, after this, they'll know who you are, and they'll tell you, you're the twat that missed the penalty." But that's the first point that Gray smiles at. Quinny says he'd been inconsolable, and Sacco says that to him, and all of a sudden he's smiling. Dickie Ord's got everybody singing, and I think Bob Murray said something about they were a beaten bunch getting off the bus to go into the pub, and he said when they came back, basically the attitude was, "This isn't happening next season. We're going up automatically next season." So those experienced players take a hand, I think, and lead them forward from that point. I'm really just emphasizing your point that had this not happened, painful though it was, that following season, we wouldn't have had that. I don't think.
Hindsight's wonderful, isn't it?
Yeah, but I mean, look, just in case we don't get a chance to see it, I think it is worth kind of just quickly just talking about the legend that is kind of Bobby Saxton just very quickly, because I just think, I mean, there's not many people who are on the club staff like that who, like, the Sunderland fans just think is an absolute legend. It's normally the top person. It's normally the manager who does something, or a player who does something. But someone like Bobby Saxton is always going to be a legend at the club. And it's funny when you talk about stories like that. I actually think this is probably the last squad that has that old school mentality about it. I think actually football changed not long after this. And you can maybe kind of stretch it to the Roy Keane era slightly, but I just think this is the last kind of era where that sort of dark humour gets players out of it. And now it's all actually. I think now probably Bobby Saxton will be hauled to HR if he makes a joke like that after that.
It's a commentary on society rather than just football.
Mickey Gray wouldn't be at the cricket; he'd be at counselling.
That's right. Well, let's hope this Saturday's playoff final has happier memories than that particular game did. I know we don't normally talk about current day things, but it's going to be a pivotal moment in our history, and I wanted to get your views on. Gavin and I talked about this on the podcast the other day. Dan Ballard's goal, if we're talking about the history of the Stadium of Light, where does it rank in terms of best moments?
Don't know yet. We won't know until after Wembley. And I said this on the reaction pod to Bomber, that this Dan Ballard moment, if we get promoted, will be up there. It'll possibly, and again, we're talking about these moments in context. We're talking about the playoff fan. If we'd finished mid-table in the second tier for 3 years, we'd be talking about this playoff final completely differently. And it's going to be the same with the Dan Ballard moment. If we go and finish the job at Wembley, the Dan Ballard moment, and we go on to stay in the Premier League for 10 years or whatever it is, then the Dan Ballard moment is potentially there's not going to be many that beats it. If it means nothing in the context of Wembley and going up, then it's just going to be another moment. That's how it works for me.
And for me, the moments captured by his performances over these two games. I was talking with an old friend who's gone to the football as long as I have, and he was saying that really his performances were very reminiscent of something like Dave Watson used to do with us. He just galvanized the whole team, the whole defense, and absolutely drove them forward. And his goal was Roy of the Rovers stuff. But as I totally agree with Chris, it depends what happens. It'll either be remembered forever or lost to the mists of time. But he's had a fantastic return to duty, Ballard. And to be compared to Davy Watson, I think says something in itself.
Yeah. Andrew, stand for you.
Yeah.
I agree with what you're saying, gents. The context of it could change come, 24th, the game? I mean, as we're speaking, we don't even know what time it kicks off, so please, I've just got the date right. What I will say, though, is no matter what happens next, the atmosphere will go down, I think, in history as one of the best at the Stadium of Light. Unfortunately, having watched it on the highlights, I don't think it comes through on the TV just how wild it was. Before kickoff, when the play ready to go, I've never known anything like it, for everybody singing along and wise men say. And then when Ballard does score that goal, it's wild. Brilliant, but it was off the scale, and a bit like we spoke about in our last episode, the Sheffield United semi-final in 98, which led to our Charlton final at Wembley, I think we'll be looking back on that evening as one of the Stadium of Light nights in terms of mood and just passion. Brilliant night.
Excellent. So next time you listen to an On This Week podcast, we will know the outcome of the playoff game. Obviously, we don't know it now, but next time you listen to one, everybody will know. And Andrew, you're going to give us a couple of clues as to somebody who's going to get a mention on next week's pod.
Yes. Born in Charlotte in North Carolina. This individual also passed away in North Carolina in February 2018. He had, however, made 8 appearances at Roker Park in 1984. And as far as his supporters were concerned, he was pretty influential leader. Now, I will admit it's a little bit of a trick question. There's a bit of a curveball in that one. Come next week, we're going to be talking about not just games, but other incidents that have happened in Sunderland's history. With it being post-season, we're going to have to be a bit creative. So yeah, you might have to. Yeah, if you're not stressing about the playoff final, you can just spend a few moments trying to think about that one and see who that mystery person is.
Well, that is all to come next week. So for now, thank you, Chris. Thank you, Kelvin. Thank you, Andrew, very much. If you've got any memories of any of the games or incidents that we've talked about today, email us at howwearthepodcast@safc@gmail.com. If you'd like to join the Danny Dichio fan club, you can also put your enrolment to the same email address and we will delete it.
Details on a postcard.
In the meantime, keep an eye out on rokerreport.sbnation.com for all of the latest news, views and opinions and daily trips down memory lane. We'll be back next week. So until then, it's goodbye from us.
Podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
It's okay not to be perfect with finances. Experian is your big financial friend and here to help. Did you know you can get matched with credit cards on the app? Some cards are labeled no ding decline, which means if you're not approved, they won't hurt your credit scores. Download the Experian app for free today. Applying for no ding decline cards won't hurt your credit scores if you aren't initially approved. Initial approval will result in a hard inquiry, which may impact your credit scores.
Experian.